This presentation is a brief overview of how structuring your classroom through success can be done through teaching expectations and procedures to students. I provided you with a list of references that were used in the development of this presentation. Graduate students may want to reference them when they get ready to begin working on their graduate project. The objectives for this presentation is to provide you with some information related to proactive strategies for preventing problem behavior and setting the stage for some quality instruction in your classroom. We'll talk specifically about designing your classroom space, scheduling, uh, establishing and teaching classroom expectations, and determining classroom procedures to implement within the context of your class management plan. A prerequisite to effective classroom management is appropriate, relevant academic curriculum, critical to whether or not students will do well. Okay, that means that it needs to be one that meets students' individual needs and that students perceive as important and meaningful. If students do not see the work that they're completing as being of purpose, then they're less likely to engage in it. So we want to make sure that we have curriculum that is appropriate to the students that we're teaching. Appropriate goals in curriculum are also required that are fair, functional, and meaningful to the student. Inappropriate expectations or curricula generate frustration, dissatisfaction, rebellion in children. All of us have heard statements such as, "This is too hard, I don't like this, why do I have to do this?" And these should be signals to us that we need to look at our curriculum and ensure that our presentation of it is fair and that how we're teaching it is meaningful to the students. Common mistakes are made all the time by teachers. One is to assume that students know what is expected of them. Okay, because a student has done something once or twice does not mean that they truly understand what the expectations are. So absence of clear rules or vaguely stated rules are going to set the stage for the likelihood of student problem behavior. The other common mistake that teachers often make is to punish students for their failure to demonstrate behavior that they do not know how to perform. Okay, there are a multitude of examples, and your text will share some of these with you as well, in terms of students who are unsure what the expectations are or do not have the skill or the repertoire needed to effectively and efficiently demonstrate the behaviors required for the class. So we need to be sure that we have clear rules and that we teach what those behaviors look like. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this presentation. Some of the causes of noncompliance that occur in a classroom may be that a student makes a decision not to follow a rule or direction. That sometimes happens. Or it may indicate that the student doesn't know what the behavior is, or they lack the skill to exhibit the desired behavior. For example, as a consultant, I was called in to observe on the playground a situation where a student was consistently being brought in at recess for fighting. While I was observing the student, it was apparent to me that this young man did not know the rules for the playground game that he was engaging in. And in fact, Neither did the other students that he was playing with. Rules were being made up as they went along, and this caused problems for the student because he didn't know how to problem solve or negotiate with his peers when he would be taken out of a game. Consequently, he would tantrum and argue and would eventually be brought into the office for the remainder of recess. So it wasn't that he chose not to follow rules or get along with other students. He really lacked the skills or the understanding of how to do it. And this is an important aspect that we need to consider when we're designing instruction and teaching students, whether it's on the playground or in the classroom, in the hallways, in the cafeteria. One of the things that as a teacher we need to do is set a practical schedule. Okay, we need to think about flexible time management skills that best serve student needs, and we need to allow priority time at the start of the school year before students return to develop a well organized schedule. This is much easier said than done. But one of the things we need to do is we need to have a balance between difficult tasks and easy tasks. We need to have a very instruction between skills that are being newly acquired and skills that are practice activities for the student. So taking time to design a practical schedule for our students is critical, and this is something that we need to spend time at the beginning of the year. My recommendation to new teachers is to talk with others and find out how they've set up their schedule. Have them provide you with a rationale of why they schedule particular activities or tasks at certain times throughout the day. This will help you to better understand. And as you begin setting up your schedule and teaching on a daily basis, you may find that there's a need to make some changes and rearrange some of the things that you're doing because of the time of day or the activity that precedes or follows do not align well with what students are doing at that moment. In elementary schools, one of the things that you'll want to do is make a list of all the school-wide events that have a fixed schedule. In many of the schools that we have what's called RTI, okay, and in RTI schools, oftentimes what we do is we have reading and math scheduled at the same time across the entire school. So knowing when reading, math, or other areas of instruction are occurring is going to be important. We need to think about times in which specialists have allocated to work with students. Okay, in some situations, what we have is push out or or pull out or push in types of instruction. Pull out in which the students leave and go somewhere else for some instruction, or push in where the teacher, the specialist comes into the classroom to work with students. But irregardless, we need to make sure that we've allocated that time and we've arranged it to make sure that it's meaningful and that students aren't missing out on other important instruction during that time as well. If team teaching, you're going to want to plan schedule time with the participating teachers. So it is going to be critical that you work together to plan instruction. And your text does talk about this, and I have a number of other resources if you're interested around team teaching that I would be glad to provide you with. Once you have a schedule, then what you want to do is define the order in for subjects and activities taught and conducted in your classroom. Construct a master schedule. As a new teacher, I often collected the master schedule for other teachers within the building because it gave me something to work from, and I could look and see how did they set up their schedules. Is this something that would work for my classroom or not? Okay, and uh, I would highly recommend that you begin to attend when you go into classrooms to the schedules that teachers have set up. This is something that takes experience and time to learn how to do well. Okay. During the first few days of the school year, within elementary programs, you're going to want to have activities um, specific to your schedule, but you also want to begin to orientate students to their environment. You want to make students feel welcome, begin to learn their names, help them to learn each other's names. You're going to want to begin to teach the classroom behavior expectations and procedures that are important within your class, as well as explaining the use of the classroom and building, providing some motivational tools to get children excited about learning. And this is also a time that you're going to be testing students and grouping them for instruction. Um, Oftentimes, we make the assumption that students will find their way within a building, but there are some students who are going to need some help with this. I highly recommend that as a classroom teacher, you take your students on a tour of the building. You show them where the restrooms are. You talk about what the expectations are in exiting and entering restrooms, the cafeteria, um, other classrooms, specialist rooms that you might students will be moving to. But take some time so that they can learn where it is that they need to be. You don't want to be caught like I was one time as a young teacher, and I had a father call and say, "Please, Ms. Martin, will you share with Sean where the boys' restroom is?" It never really dawned on me that he was unaware of where the restroom was. It was only a few doors down from the classroom. After that, I learned that it was very important that I make sure that students are acclimated to the building and they know where all of the important rooms are within it. In secondary classrooms, you'll sometimes have block scheduling, and this is something that you're going to need to schedule carefully. And with students that might have challenging behavior or who have difficulty with changes in their schedule and routine, you're going to want to pre-teach what the block schedule is, prompt them on a regular basis when the schedule is changing from day to day and week to week. So, other strategies you want to think about is really acknowledging students learn at their own rate, and that they're that you create active learners within this environment. As we start working with older students, now what we want to do is we want to teach them how to be responsible, respectful of their own behavior and that of others, and how to allocate their time, how to manage it in a useful way so that they're able to complete activities and work well with others. There are some specific instructional activities that are important that we need to think about on a regular basis. And we need to set aside time for each of those activities and teach those to our students. I'm going to switch now and talk about school-wide rules and expectations. Okay, this is an important aspect of what you'll be doing as a teacher, whether it's in a special education setting or a general education setting. Okay, and I have an umbrella here because part of what we want to do is we want to link our school-wide rules with our classroom rules. Okay, and show students how these align. What is the similarity here? Okay, when we begin to develop classroom rules, we want as few rules as possible. We want to apply those rules in different settings and routines, meaning that this rule, we need to be able to look at it and think about how do I define it specific to large group instruction. How do I define this rule specific to entering the classroom? They need to be stated behaviorally and they need to be enforceable. Okay, so you need to have rules that students know exactly what it is that they need to do and that you can observe and enforce easily within your classroom setting. They need to be stated positively. Begin now to start to state what you want students to do rather than what you do not want students to do. Okay, very important. Telling students what not to do. If they comply, then you really have no place to go with that. Tell them what it is you actually want them to do instead. Okay, the important aspect of teaching rules. Rules need to be reasonable. Is it something that you model and demonstrate on a regular basis? Okay, if you want students to use kind, respectful words, do you use kind, respectful words? And rules need to have consistent consequences for fulfillment and for infractions. So we need to think about what are we going to do to encourage the appropriate behavior? What will we do to discourage inappropriate behavior? Your textbook provides you with many examples and strategies for this, as well as we will get into this later on and spend some time talking about different ways that we can do this as well. So think about rules, but also think about roles and responsibility. It's not enough to state this is the rule, this is what you need to do. We also need to think about what is our role, what is our responsibility in ensuring that this rule is enforced. So here's a school-wide rule. Be safe. Okay, it's an umbrella rule. It's very broad. What I want to do is I want to define safe from the aspect of what it means within the context of a classroom setting. Okay, so this is an important aspect of it. So I'm going to be safe, but I'm going to take it from the perspective of the different routines that occur within a classroom. Be safe will look different during entering the classroom than it will during a science lab, for example. Also, identify the roles and responsibilities of both the student and the teacher. It's not enough to state what the student will do. What will you do as a teacher to ensure that this occurs? So here's an example of entering the classroom. The umbrella rule or classroom school-wide rule is be safe. In our classroom, be safe means when you enter the classroom, you keep hands, feet, and objects to yourself. As a teacher, my responsibility is to teach safety habits and procedures, to teach techniques for self-control. What do I do to ensure that my hands and feet and objects are to myself, and to acknowledge appropriate behavior when I see it occurring? Okay. Here is another one. This is for entering the classroom, respect self and others. Okay, student responsibility in terms of respect self and other is walk in and speak softly. Okay, put away your belongings and take your assigned seat. Okay, when I do these things as a student, I'm demonstrating respect for self and others. My job as a teacher is to stand at the door. Okay, if I stand at the door, I strategically can see students entering the classroom and see students that might be lingering outside my classroom door. I greet students by name as they enter the classroom and acknowledge their presence. I wait to share conversations with students, okay, because I want them to put their things away, get in their assigned seat before class starts. So conversation will wait until later. I have areas set up specifically for putting away coats, turning in assignments, so on. So I've set up some routines and some structure in the classroom to ensure that this happens. I have a permanent seating arrangement, so all students know where to sit and they sit in the same place each day. I found that this was very effective for me. Other people may find that they don't need to do this, but I certainly felt it was required. And I always, again, recognize appropriate behavior and acknowledge it. So, again, as I'm looking at this, what I want to do is I don't want to just talk about what is the student responsibility. I want to have a clear picture in my mind as well in terms of what is my responsibility as a teacher. Okay. Now, once I've developed my classroom rules and expectations, I then need to use an instructional approach to teach them. So I need to remember a very important guiding principle: teach and manage social behavior directly and proactively. Okay, so I'm going to teach and manage social behavior in the same way as I do an academic um, subject. I want to integrate social and academic management strategies within and across the curricula. So it isn't that I teach a rule and then not come back and address it on a regular basis throughout the day. It's something that is ongoing. And I increase the intensity, the specialization, the complexity of that instruction as errors become more chronic. So if I teach the skills and expectations at the onset, and I contingently reinforce those behaviors that I want to see occur, and um, make sure that I prompt students when I see a minor error in behavior, then I'm not going to have to spend a lot of time on correcting behavior. Okay, but I will increase how much time I spend on behavior based upon the data that I collect. If students are making errors on a regular basis when it comes to behavior, then I'm going to want to go back and reteach that behavior. Okay, so an instructional approach for establishing and implementing the rules is first and above all teach. Identify to the students and explain the rule. Remember, we talked about a common mistake that teachers make is the inference that students know what the rule is. We want to explicitly teach and explain that rule. We want to demonstrate examples as well as non-examples. This is what entering the classroom needs to look like. Okay, this is not an example of what entering the classroom looks like in my room. Okay, arrange time to practice, to role play, and or to engage in behavioral rehearsal. So as I stand at the door and I greet students as they enter the classroom, I can prompt them in terms of the things that they need to do and reinforce them for those behaviors. Okay, we can, as a class, discuss what it looks like to enter the classroom, to be safe, to be respectful. We can go back and evaluate how well we did in terms of doing it. But we want to always identify and explain this is what it looks like, okay, in observable, measurable terms. Okay, we want to remind students. So we want to prompt the rule immediately before they enter into the natural context for it. Remember, as we leave the classroom today, you need to place your homework or your assignment in the box before you leave. Make sure all the papers and garbage are picked up from around your desk. Okay, so again, remind them what it is you want them to do. Supervise within the context of it, provide feedback, and collect data. Okay. Same as we do for learning and teaching content, we can do for teaching the behaviors that we want in our class. An important aspect as well is to evaluate, to examine whether or not the instruction that we provided, the prompts that we're giving students is making a difference. Okay, so we can make some decisions that we can do some follow-up if we need to. So, meet Mr. Wyoming, and I'm going to share with you the lesson that he developed for his class. Mr. Wyoming is a 5th grade teacher, and he is targeting whole group instruction, and his expectation is that students follow directions the first time. It is respectful and responsible when students do this. His rationale for following directions the first time is because of safety, effectiveness, and timeliness. Okay, so he's going to talk specifically about why is this important within the context of his class. Okay, student expectation for following directions the first time is listen carefully, ask questions for understanding, and do what the teacher requests. So there are 3 different expectations that come under following directions the first time. So these would be examples of what does it look like when students follow directions. The teacher's responsibility is always to gain student attention, to give clear and concise directions, check for understanding, provide examples or demonstrate, always monitor the students, and again, recognize appropriate behavior. So in this example, okay, the teacher not only says you need to be responsible and respectful, but the teacher, Mr. Wyoming, goes a step further and he defines what responsible, respectful looks like within the context of group instruction. Okay, so then in terms of the classroom, he demonstrates the steps for desiring. Okay, so these are examples of following directions the first time. Mr. Wyoming demonstrates the steps necessary for designing and wiring a complete circuit that will enable students to turn a bulb on and off. During the demonstration, Leroy is busy drawing unrelated pictures and passing them to friends. Is this following directions? Why or why not? Again, I can provide students with examples for discussion. Is this following directions the first time? We want the students to be able to differentiate between examples and non-examples of what it looks like. Here's another example that Mr. Wyoming has shared. He requests that students work in pairs. Students are to draw a map of a country that demonstrates the primary architectural crops and the region in which they are grown. Sally raises her hand asks for clarification on the choices of countries. Upon receiving an answer, she quickly locates a partner and begins work. Is this following directions? Why or why not? Given our context of what following directions looks like, is Sally following directions? Okay, the other thing, so Mr. Wyoming can provide examples and non-examples, and students can provide a rationale for whether or not it's following examples. With younger children, I might model what it looks like and what it doesn't look like, and they can differentiate in that way. Another thing that Mr. Wyoming has done is he does some practice activities on a regular basis at the onset of the school year to ensure that students are cognizant and aware of what following directions is. So the class plays a variation of Simon Says, and they are to listen and follow directions. They have individual scorecards that they mark, and they're able to when they are able to comply with the directions the first time. A discussion follows the game at midday and at the end of the day, in which students share strategies. Mr. Wyoming can use for attaining and maintaining attention during directions. So in this example, he's able to observe, he's collecting some data, he's also discussing it with students and acknowledging when students are following directions during the game, and marking it on their management card. And he's also eliciting ideas from the students. What works well to get their attention? Okay. Each of the student records the frequency in which they follow directions the first time during a specific instructional period. Okay, so we have some self-recording going on, and we have some good research that substantiates that self-recording is an excellent tool for teaching and changing behavior. Even if students are not accurate in their recording, they now become cognizant of what it is that they should be doing, even if they're not doing it. Okay, so self-recording, excellent tool, and it gives us some data that we can now look at. The other thing is that Mr. Wyoming tallies the number of times that he observes the students following directions the first time. So not only are the students collecting some data on themselves, he's collecting some data on the entire class and using this information. At the end of the day, students and teachers review progress, and a goal is set for the next day. This is very similar to a strategy that I've used in classrooms in the past, and oftentimes it was more than anything else were students able to meet the goal or not. Oftentimes I didn't have to have any other contingency or any other prize or activity to follow. It was just working to build an awareness of whether or not students were following directions the first time. And again, teaching them the importance of being safe, respectful, and responsible. Mr. Wyoming always prompts the students at the onset of group instruction by pointing to the scorecard on the whiteboard. So one of the things, he doesn't even need to use words. He can just touch the card or look in that direction, reminding the students, this is important. I need to have everyone follow directions the first time. He asked students, someone, share with the class how I can tell if you're listening and ready to follow directions. So it's a prompt or reminder, and he's having the students participate in this. Mr. Wyoming states, remember, I'm going to give instructions only once. Give me your full attention. Bill, will know how to do this because he's quiet and has his eyes on me. Thank you. So rather than acknowledging the student who was not attending, he's now focusing in on the students that are. So he's using what's called a praise around strategy and praising students who are engaged in the behavior that he wants to see occur. Now, Mr. Wyoming also carefully monitors. He rewards points to the students. They self-evaluate, and he provides, again, specific praise. Okay, rather than just using good job, great, fantastic, awesome, he specifically states what it is that he liked and what he observed. Beth, your eyes were on me while I gave instructions. Thank you. You quickly started working. Okay, so being very specific. And by being specific in his feedback to that student, other students are hearing it as well. And this helps to prompt those students to follow suit and to listen and follow directions. He evaluates the progress of the students. He observes to determine whether they've complied. If they did, a point is recorded on a scorecard for the class. So he's got a scorecard up on the whiteboard that he's also giving points. He can then determine percent of opportunities that the students follow directions the first time during whole class instruction, and he reports this to the students at the end of the day. Students really do enjoy graphing, and I often would graph student progress as a whole class, and I would have students graph their own data as to what their success was so that they could see that over time. Okay. For secondary students, our assumption is that, they've been in school longer, they do know many of the rules and regulations. But I still need to explicitly state what those expected behaviors are, and I need to reinforce the appropriate behavior and evaluate it on an ongoing basis. Again, I have in italics down here, and this is important. Never underestimate the student need for ongoing reminders, supervision, and feedback in order to establish classroom expectations. Remember when I talked about entering the classroom and respectful, safe, responsible behavior? As a secondary teacher, this was one of the best strategies I ever used, was standing at the door as students entered the classroom. I could then give them some prompts, reminders if they didn't have their materials to go back and get them. I could also reinforce them for having their homework and turning it in and getting started on time. So we want to make sure that we're supervising students, we're giving them feedback. If I had sat at my desk or engaged in getting materials on the board and out for students, then I'm not interacting with them. I'm not able to really acknowledge those critical behaviors that are important at the onset of a lesson so that we can all begin on time. Classroom procedures are important because they reduce the non-academic time and increase learning time. The more I have structured classroom procedures in place in my classroom, the less amount of time we spend in chaos and trying to settle down and get ready to learn. They prevent many of the discipline problems also because it's predictable. So not only do I want to have rules and expectations, I want to have solid procedures, and I want to be able to teach students these are the procedures for entering, putting away your materials. These are the procedures for exiting the classroom. Okay. Here are where materials go when you're done with them. Okay, during small group, it's okay to move around the classroom, but you'll do that quietly. So you want to define what those procedures will look like. So you need to have a definition of routine activities completed by the student, and have goals for how students will manage these tasks by themselves. Okay, students, when we set up expectations, we teach those expectations and we can contingently reinforce our observation of those things occurring. What happens is that students now begin more effectively to manage their own behavior. I have to spend less time doing it as a classroom teacher. After I've established rules and procedures, I want to think about some self-management skills that students can use for completing work, following some of those procedures. So I may have a checklist for students within the classroom on their desk so they know exactly what to do. In my class, typically I always had a schedule up on the whiteboard with what we were going to do and how much time we were going to spend in each one of those activities. I could come back and reference that, and I could also define some specific behaviors and expectations related to each of those. Okay, this just made time more manageable within the classroom, and it provided a more orderly environment conducive to teaching and learning. Okay, so one example that I will share here that worked well with younger children as well as with older children was that in order to keep the noise level down, because I did a lot of group activities with students, small group activities, large group, where they're moving around and engaged with other students, noise level can go up. So we had a rule in my classroom that the noise level could never go above the sound of the music that was playing in the classroom. I needed to be able to hear the music in the background. I typically played classical music, and students got to a point where they enjoyed it. They got to where they knew the different instruments that were playing, the different composers for the music. Vivaldi was a favorite of many of the students that I worked with. But what I could then do was I could just make a statement or touch my ear. Noise, or touch my ear, and it was enough to quiet down the room. And then, important piece was that I always followed it up with a thank you. It's much quieter now. I'm able to hear the music. Okay, so coming up with strategies that will help to reduce noise, to reduce movement in the classroom is going to be important. And uh, each classroom will be a little bit different. In your opportunity to practice that you'll be doing, you'll design a classroom and you want to contextualize the way it looks based upon the students that you're serving and where the students sit, how the chairs, the desks are arranged will all come into play with this. So, big idea, use the same instructional strategies for teaching behavior as you do for teaching expectations. Be clear about the behaviors expected of the students. Teach the routines formally early in the school year. So, big idea, design, and structure the structure and function of the classroom to increase predictability and to accommodate individual and collective needs of all students. In your opportunity to practice that you'll be completing, you will design a classroom environment as well as a behavior matrix using the strategies that we've been talking about this afternoon. And then you will use this to design a lesson to teach those expectations. Thank you for your attention. And please make sure that you review the brief presentation on part 1 and part 2 for opportunity to practice 1. It will give you more details about how to design your matrices and your lesson plans. Thank you.